Wednesday in the middle of Holy Week is always a day we stop and we contemplate Judas. Church doesn't tend to do that very often. We tend to want Judas to be a bad guy. And, when we're reading through John, John's not subtle. There's a lot of times when Judas is very definitely the bad guy. Matthew really is the only one that gives us any kind of sympathetic reading of Judas. And quite frankly, it's sympathetic because he commits suicide out of his guilt. We don't have that kind of thing in the story we're looking at today with Judas. We do have, however, is Jesus feeding him? You know, it'd be so much easier, if we could identify the bad guys. That, I don't know, we had a narrator going through life to tell us what was about to come. I know there's times I'd love a crystal ball to tell me what's in my future, but also to identify the people that are going to be in trouble in the future. Now, the Gospel of John gives us an all-seeing Jesus. The Synoptic Gospels don't do that. But John gives us a version of Jesus who knew everything. There was not a question. He knew what was coming. The only time where there's actually any doubt was back in chapter 2 with the Feast of Cana, and his mother had to push him into starting his ministry because she knew he was ready, even though he didn't think he was. We don't have that kind of insecurity at this stage in the game. We have Jesus very, very much in charge of what's going to happen. So he tells his friends, and they're all around the table now. Jesus has retired from public life. He will forever now be either with his friends or alone or going through the events of Good Friday. He is talking with his friends. He was talking. And Peter got kind of curious when Jesus said, "One of you is going to betray me." Peter, we've discussed this. He's not the brightest bulb in the tree. Peter wants to know, so he kind of nudges the next person to him, and he says, "You ask Jesus what that's all about." And so the person beside him does. And Jesus says that he's going to be betrayed by someone, and whoever he gives this piece of bread to is going to be the one. And he gives it to Judas. And we read in the scripture that the spirit of temptation, the spirit Hasatan, enters Judas at that point in time. So all this time, the foreshadowing, the really heavy-handed Judas is a bad guy, suddenly we have Judas just sitting there with the boys and girls, because there was definitely women there too, and being passed and identified in this crowd that he's going to be the ultimate stumbling block. Can't even imagine what that would have been. But the scriptures say it's not until that moment where Jesus gives him the bread. Then Hasatan is part of the struggle, taking essentially away the responsibility or the agency, I guess, of Judas. Judas, not a bad guy, maybe, not a good guy, not a smart guy, just a guy, often set up. In our Christianity, if we want to do things simplistically, we certainly have lots of experience in church history to show us how to do that, but I don't think that's faithful to those who came before us. And it is certainly not faithful to those who have complicated stories like Judas has. He was set up, maybe. He was chosen. Maybe he had no choice in any of it. It was preordained. All of these arguments have been put forth throughout history. I'm not saying anything brand new or earth-shattering. But taking time to just kind of look at Judas, look at what might have been going through his mind, what was happening when he took off. He left his friends behind. Jesus said that he was off doing what he had to do. The disciples and the others closest to Jesus had no idea what he actually meant. But Judas had choices to make. It couldn't have been easy. Take time to look at Judas and remember that even as we look at Judas, Jesus still served him. Jesus still considered him a friend. Jesus still was disappointed, but yet he and Judas were in this dance of betrayal and sacrifice that no one else was really part of. Even Peter, with his denial 3 times, was never quite in the intimacy of the struggle that Judas and Jesus would have, Judas most particularly. In looking at God's plan if we want to call it that, and looking at the way the universe unfolds, looking at the way we come around to experience the same thing over and over again. God does unexpected things. Judas is not sent away. Judas is not treated like, oh, you're going to be the one that ruins everything, so let's get rid of you now. Judas is still included. We, as followers of Christ, we don't get the freedom to decide who is and who is not part of Jesus' circle. That's not our job to judge. That's, in fact, it's incredible hypocrisy to think we have the right to make that call. God always turns everything upside down that status quo and tradition tells us are the way it's supposed to go. Judas gives us an opportunity to take another look at this entire story through another eyes, through another perspective, through another participation, and see what else is going on. Find your own place in Judas' story. He is perchance the most relatable one we have in this entire Holy Week narrative.